some other prominent group, I guess the lulsecs and the anonymous of the world, sort of do things, at least with some sort of end state in mind. That's the way the military operates. But I want to talk about the offensive cyber thing, and I know that the brief was originally coined offensive cyber, and I want to get away from that for a minute for a couple reasons. Not only do it was, I'm not from cybercom trying to say that we should be doing offensive cyber, to try to explain to you what the military does, or how we would use this capability in the future. Well, the Department of Defense operates within a spectrum of conflict. And the reason I say that is because, with those blocks at the top, stable, peace, unstable, insurgency, general war, you can look at the world right now and see that we're in one of those categories all over the place. And within each of those categories, we have operational themes. So as an example, one of the operational themes, peaceful military engagements. What we do, you would say most of the countries in the world that we're in a period of sort of a peaceful coexistence with. And especially our allies, our partners, we do training, we do recovery operations when we need to, things like arms control, counter-drug. When we start moving up the level a little bit, limited intervention is actually the one I'd like to talk about the most, and one that I'm going to talk about again, as I go through some more slides. But a limited intervention is a specific operation to achieve an end state, a clearly defined end state, limited in scope. Sort of those examples there, a NEO is a non-combat evacuation operation. The Marines do those all the time. Go into an environment, maybe it's breaking down, you got to get some American citizens out of there, how are they going to do it? Strikes and raids. Strikes and raids, I think we're beginning to see now, and we might see more of. And as we start thinking through this might be how we classify these kinds of operations. I got a slide coming up in a little bit where I talk about Stuxnets, just as an example. But I would classify that as a strike or a raid for whoever did it, however it was done with a limited scope to achieve a certain objective and then kind of end the operation. Peace operations, kind of self-explanatory. There's lots of reasons we're in peace operations. Irregular warfare. Again, on irregular warfare, you could see that kind of in how we support either irregular warfare or go to fight irregular warfare. Iraq and Afghanistan have sort of devolved into irregular warfare. They kind of came from major combat operations and sort of going backwards. And in the spectrum of conflict, the military's goal is, as we plan operations to execute through that spectrum of conflict, is to take it from the right of that spectrum and bring it to the left. We're there to take violent actions and bring them, and hopefully by the time we leave, we're in a period of stable peace, or at least we've left it better than we found it. I'm sure we could have a lot of arguments about the things that we're doing now, and if we're going to leave places better than we found them, but that's the idea, that's our intent, that's why we're going there. So within the whole spectrum of conflicts, you got the elements. Now I know this is kind of an eye chart, and I apologize for that, and this is mostly for the people that afterwards who want to go through the slides and read through them a little bit more. But within any of those operations I just showed you on the last slide, the kind of things that we would do there are represented here. So that we have offensive, defensive, stability, and civil support operations. Now, how you weight those, again going back to that last slide, is what kind of makes that operation that operation. Obviously, to the right of the slide, in major combat operations, offensive things are the main reason we're there. You're there to, we're the Department of Defense, and I used to get into this argument with some of the other partner agencies we work for, and they'd look at us and they'd say, "Man, you military guys, all you want to do is break things." And I'd stand up there in my uniform and I'd go, "Yeah, that's what we do. We break things. You don't ask an F-18 pilot to drop picnic baskets in another country. He has kinetic weapons. He drops bombs and JDAMs and shoots down airplanes. That's what he does. That is his domain, and his whole job is to get better at that." The idea was, so when we get into information operations, and CNO being one of the pillars of information operations, military planners, the guys who are going to plan in that environment, are thinking through how to support these kind of spectrum of conflict with a different operational themes. And when we're going to achieve some commander's end state in there, we're going to do things that leverage both offensive, defensive, stability, and civil support. So I guess what I'm trying to get people in this audience away from, or I wish the media would get away from this, is that as the cyber capabilities start to evolve, they're not just there for offensive reasons. We do those for a lot of different reasons. And now I'm going to break down some examples. Shriever War Game. Shriever War Game is something that started a couple years ago. I participated in it last year. It's out here actually in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is a cyberspace war game where we get together with a lot of inter-service partners, a lot of multi-agencies and multi-nations to come up with a war game, space, cyberspace, kind of all work through it, trying to leverage each other's capabilities to achieve some kind of end state, learn things about it. But it's done under the context of peaceful military engagement and, for the most part, with stability in mind. Here's the Stuxnet thing I want to talk about. And again, not knowing anything about Stuxnet other than what I've read in the media, what you could argue is there's somebody pissed off at the Iranians. And for whatever reason, they're concerned about a particular capability that they had. And they came up, and in my mind, I'd call it a strike because it was limited scope. It was designed specifically with one thing in mind, and that was to degrade the Iranian weapons program with no particular follow-on action, or at least none that we've seen to date. But once it was executed and you could say completed, it was over. Like I said, to date we've seen no follow-on action. But under the scope of limited intervention, it was something that whoever did it decided to do. Russia versus Georgia, we talk about this one all the time. And this is the first time when everybody wants to go to call cyber warfare. Oh, we saw the Russians do cyber warfare against the Georgia, Estonia, and one other country at the different times, different periods. But when you look at that, the actual cyber attack, most people in this room would say, what was a denial of service attack against some government websites? Big deal. Well, yeah. But if you look through it in the context of whatever military planner put that together, what it was done to enable some other action. It was done to get the Georgians to turn their head for a minute and say, why is my banking system going down? And whoa, where'd that tank come from? So when we talk about information operations, for the most part, information operations are done to enable other things. They're not done with the effect that we deliver there, whatever it is. And when you talk about information operations, there's 5 pillars: MILDEC, PSYOP, computer network operations, OPSEC, and one other. Somebody help me. I'm sure somebody in the room knows what the 5th one is. It's escaping me right now. That's why we're there. That's why we do it. All right, so this next slide, before I hit the slide key, I'll take a sip here to calm my nerves. So before I hit the next slide, I got to kind of intro the next slide for a minute. So talking about the military planning process is, again, why I came. I want to kind of walk you through that and just get an understanding of what I'll call it the ass pain that military planners go through, because it is not easy. It is very painful. You get beat up quite a bit, and it's way harder than executing. And that's not to insult anybody who works on a keystroke on the other end of it, but it's the thing it's the longest pole in the tent. And if it's not done right, it's how things get effed up. And we've seen good examples of operations. We've seen bad examples of operations, but it's the planning that makes that possible. So I wanted to walk you through an example, and because I couldn't really talk to a real-world example, I have to talk to this one. Okay, so pause for effect. All right. So Live Free, Die Hard. First of all, I love this movie. I know when it first came out a couple years ago, it was, oh my God, the hacker. It was, look what they can do. Look how effed up things are. And that was the first context of looking at that movie, looking at it through the lens of only a cyber attack on the United States. But when you start breaking it down, and I start talking about, did Hollywood do their homework? And once I became a planner and started thinking it through another context, if you take the cyber side away from it and you think of it just how that guy executed that operation, it kind of makes for a nice case study. So first of all, the movie was based on an article, Farewell to Arms, written by this guy, John Carlin, who basically wrote an article talking about the vulnerabilities of our critical infrastructure. And it was written like 10 years ago. So it was kind of, not I'm saying it wasn't ahead of its time, but it was written before critical infrastructure was really on everybody's lips. The movie itself, focused on the execution. It was this Thomas Gabriel, the bad guy, who went in and was taking down our infrastructure and, the fire sale, all this other stuff. But when you really look through the movie, in my mind, it was a very well-executed information operations campaign to achieve some end state. Now, of course, Bruce Willis gets involved. He fucks everything up and takes down the bad guy. But had Bruce Willis not been in the movie, this guy would have pulled off what he did. And if you looked at how he sequenced his operation, he actually did it in a pretty good way. And again, please take the technical things that he did off the table. Let's just for a minute say that the technical side of the operation were possible. He sequenced them in such a way that he really, they kind of pulled it off. So I say part of a bigger plan, and I almost wish there could be a Live Free, Die Hard prequel. I mean, nobody would go see it. There'd be a handful of people that would go see it. But it would be the recruiting of Thomas Gabriel to pull off this operation against the United States. Because everybody's seen the movie, right? I can't imagine there's anybody who hasn't seen the movie. All right, good. I didn't want to have to explain the movie. But, in the beginning, you find out who Thomas Gabriel is, basically you find out he's a disgruntled government employee who tried to show the government how screwed up the our security was, and of course he's blackballed and thrown into the wild. And then all of a sudden he's executing this operation. And I'm like, holy shit, where'd he get all that stuff? Where'd he get that truck? Where'd he get those helicopters? Where did those French ninjas come from? That guy had to have some bank. He had to have some funding. And the beginning of the movie does a kind of a decent job. At least it's only in the credits. It's only in the first 3 seconds of when they're going out, and they're kind of got that computer screen. And we have access to defense, access to financial, access to transportation. I'm like, okay, so they kind of hinted at a little bit what we'll call the preparation of the battle space going into the movie. But holy crap, that guy had to have a ton of money, and to pull all that stuff off. I mean, for guys of you in this audience who do this stuff, you know that of all those things that they were trying to access, that would have taken years to execute that operation. Not only from a financial point, but the access and the sequencing and the rehearsal, all that other stuff, it just wasn't done on the fly. So I always say, and I hope there's no French in the room, but I thought it was like, so if the movie could have been, he was approached by the French, here's some French ninjas, it'll be your muscle, we'll give you your money, and we want you to destabilize the United States of America, and oh, by the way, you'll get to take all that money home. But if you looked at the movie in the context of a much bigger campaign, it would have been the operation to destabilize the United States, and there was probably some follow-on action after he conducted that operation, that maybe there was another sequenced operation that was going to happen behind it, the next movie. What was the thing that was going to happen after this guy brought the government to kind of its knees for the most part? So when you start thinking about how they did that, again, eye chart, and I apologize for this, operational design. Planners live in this world. Planners take commanders' intent, run them through a bunch of filters, and come up with some plan on the other end. And for those, I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that are familiar with this, and I'm sure there's some people that aren't. From a planner's perspective, this is our TCP/IP stack. See, I know a little bit of technology. So when I sit through most of the conferences in here, it goes right over my head. Technology, I'm like, 1.0, whatever. And I would expect some of the planning process for people who aren't familiar to go over your head. And just from an abstract perspective, wow, why do they have to do those things? It doesn't make sense to me. In the beginning, I don't disagree with you. But when you become a planner, and what I would argue is, there's a lot of people out there that think there are planners, and I thought I was a planner when I showed up, just on the fact that I was a military officer that had done amphibious landings and done harpoon engagements. And yes, there is a planning perspective to that, but it's not military joint operation planning and execution planning, which is a whole different animal. And you kind of learn that the painful way the first time you go to present something and they ask you a million questions, like, I didn't think of that, and you get beat up. So as you look at that slide from sort of the left to the right, operational art, that operational art we coined in the military is based on your experience and based on the way that you kind of know certain capabilities work and certain things work together. You're able to use that, put some plans together that kind of make sense, and throw them out the other side to your leadership to buy off on. One of the things that we're finding out in cyber is it's difficult for us military planners to understand this new capability, which is why it becomes painful at times. Not only for the reasons it's hard to explain to military leadership what it is that you guys do, but it's also difficult for us to quantify the effects of what you guys do, which makes leadership a little bit hesitant to maybe execute on operations. So when you start doing sort of this mission analysis, you get into this effects-based planning. And what that is on the right side of the slide, you sort of see the military end state, which is what you want done. What are you trying to do? And as I'm going to kind of relate this back to the movie, I'm going to kind of jump between planning and jump between the movie. Military end state, and I got another slide that talks to this in a second, was destabilize the United States, or ultimately in the movie it was he was going to get into Woodlawn and steal all the financial data that was being backed up there. Well, to do that, knowing that the end state is you got to look at your target, and I'm going to move to the right side again and go to center of gravity. Center of gravity analysis is something that takes the most time for what we're doing, because that ultimately leads us to where we want to deliver our effects. Center of gravity usually, Clausewitz defines it as, the hub of all power movement on which everything depends. So when you break that down, center of gravity, you get critical capabilities, and you can do this in a lot of different ways. And maybe just for an example, we'll say like an air defense system. Well, an air defense system's critical capabilities, it's got the missile, it's got the launcher, it's got the radar, and the radar